There is a document in your wallet, or your phone, or a drawer somewhere in your home that tells you the exact moment you entered the world, the hour, the day, the month, the year. You have probably never questioned why that document exists. It feels like the most basic record a civilization could keep. Of course, someone wrote down when you were born. Of course, that information follows you through your entire life. Of course, your age is a fact, fixed and verifiable, something the government can look up. But go back 150 years. Go back to the grandparents of your grandparents and ask that same question. Most of them could not have answered it, not because the records were lost, not because of war or fire or bureaucratic failure, because the records were never made, because the concept of a fixed, documented, state-verified date of birth did not exist for most of the people who have ever lived, including people who died within living memory of people alive today. That is not a footnote. That is the entire shape of human history up until very recently. And the question nobody asks is what replaced it and why. Start with something concrete. The United States Federal Census of 1880 was the first census in American history to record the exact age of every individual counted. Not an age range, not a rough estimate, an exact number. Every census before 1880, 1790, 1800, 1810, all the way through 1870, recorded age differently. Some recorded age brackets. Some recorded only the age of the household head. Some recorded nothing about individual ages at all. The 1850 census was the first to record names of all free persons in a household, not just the head. Before that, most people appeared in the federal record as a tally mark in a column, a tick, sorted by gender and approximate age range. That was your great-great-great-grandmother. A tick in a column, female, aged 20 to 30. No name, no birth date, no document that proved she had ever existed at all. Now ask yourself, how old was she? She probably could not have told you precisely, and neither could anyone else. This is the part that takes time to absorb, because it runs so contrary to how we experience ourselves now. Age, for most of human history, was not a fixed fact. It was an approximation, a story, something you carried in your memory, passed down from parents who carried it in theirs, subject to the drift and compression that memory always produces over time. In rural communities across Europe and America, well into the 19th century, the question, "How old are you?" was answered the way you might answer, "What time is it?" without a watch. You gave your best estimate. You said roughly, or about, or "I believe I was born the winter after the Great Flood," or "the summer my father built the barn." Historians studying census records from the mid-1800s found a pattern so consistent it became known as age heaping. When people were asked their age and did not know it precisely, they rounded to the nearest number ending in 0 or 5. The census records from this era show enormous spikes at ages 20, 25, 30, 35, 40. The spikes are not real. They are the shape of uncertainty. They are what a population looks like when most people are guessing. In 1870, approximately 1/3 of Americans gave census takers an age ending in 0. In 1880, after birth registration began spreading through the states, the heaping began to flatten. By 1900, it was nearly gone. That flattening is the moment the modern self was born, the documented self, the self that exists on paper as well as in the world. Now hold this. What did people use instead? If you did not have a birth date, you still needed some way to locate yourself in time, some way to know roughly how old you were, when you were old enough to work, old enough to marry, old enough to inherit. The answer, across almost every pre-modern culture, was events. You were born the year of the big drought, the year the old church burned, the year the soldiers came through, the year the river flooded the lower fields for the 3rd time in a decade. Your age was not a number, it was a position in a sequence of things that happened. And as long as the community around you remembered those events, your position in time was legible. This system worked because communities were stable and continuous. The people who witnessed your birth were often still alive when you married. The priest who baptized you might bury you. The knowledge of when things happened was held collectively, distributed across living memory, maintained through conversation and story and seasonal repetition. It was not a system designed for a world where you would leave your village at 20, move to a city where nobody knew you, apply for a job, open a bank account, register for military service, and be required to prove to strangers with ledgers exactly when you were born. That world was coming, and when it arrived, it needed documents. The history of birth registration in America is not a story of gradual enlightenment. It is a story of institutional need pulling legal infrastructure into existence. Massachusetts passed the first comprehensive birth registration law in 1842. By 1880, only a handful of states had functioning registration systems. By 1900, the majority still did not. The federal government did not establish a national birth registration area until 1915. It took until 1933 for all 48 contiguous states to be included. There are people alive today whose parents were born before their state required anyone to record that birth. People who applied for Social Security in the 1930s and 1940s and could not produce a birth certificate because no birth certificate had ever been made. The Social Security Administration had to develop alternative documentation procedures for this exact reason. They accepted baptismal records, family Bible entries, census records, affidavits from relatives. They accepted the old system as evidence of a self that the new system had not yet gotten around to recording. And here is where it becomes genealogical, personal, something that is not just history. If you have ever tried to trace your family backward past 1880 in American records, you have met what genealogists call the brick wall. You follow a name through census records, forward and backward, and then somewhere in the mid-1800s the trail dissolves. Names become impossibly common. Ages shift by 5 or 10 years between one census and the next. Not because people were lying, but because they were estimating, and estimates drift. Locations become vague. You cannot distinguish your ancestor from 3 other people with the same name in the same county. That is not a records problem. That is the seam, the exact point where the documented self did not yet exist, and the remembered self left no paper trail. Your ancestor was real. They were known. They existed in a web of community memory that was specific and accurate, but that memory was never translated into the new system, and when the people who held it died with them. I want to stop here and be honest about something, because the credibility of this depends on not overstating it. The obvious counter-argument is that birth registration was simply progress, that knowing your exact age is useful, that the systems built around documented identity, Social Security, passports, medical records, legal inheritance, created genuine benefits that the old system could not have provided. This is true. The logistical benefits of documented identity are real, and I am not disputing them. But the logistical argument does not explain the timing, and the timing is what I kept returning to. Birth registration did not spread because communities suddenly wanted to know when their members were born. It spread because institutions needed to know. Specifically, the military, the tax system, the insurance industry, and the emerging bureaucracies of industrial employment. The Civil War draft was one of the first moments the American government needed to verify the ages of large numbers of men quickly and reliably. The system it found was inadequate. Church records varied wildly. Family testimony was unverifiable. Men appeared older or younger than their claimed ages, depending on whether they wanted to serve or avoid service. After the war, the push for systematic birth registration accelerated, not from communities asking for it, from institutions that needed it. In England, the same pattern. Civil registration of births became compulsory in 1875, not 1837 when it was introduced, because the 1837 system was voluntary and most people ignored it. The compulsion came when the state decided that voluntary was not enough. When the pension system, the inheritance courts, and the school leaving age requirements created enough institutional demand for verified ages that the state was willing to enforce registration rather than merely encourage it. The document followed the institution, not the other way around. There is a detail I found in the research that I have not been able to stop thinking about. The 1900 United States Census was the first to ask for month and year of birth, not just age. The census takers were instructed to record exact birth dates wherever possible. When researchers later compared the birth dates recorded in the 1900 census against actual birth records from states that had registration systems, they found something consistent. People's reported birth dates shifted, not by days, by months, sometimes by years. A woman who the 1900 census records as born in March 1851 appears in the Massachusetts birth registry as born in November 1849. A man listed as 42 turns out to be 44. A child recorded as born in 1895 was actually born in 1893. These were not deliberate lies. They were the residue of a system where age had always been approximate. People had been carrying rough estimates their entire lives. When asked for precision by a census taker with a form, they produced their best guess. And their best guess was close, but not exact, because exact had never mattered before. The government built a system that required precision. Then it discovered that the population it was trying to document had been living in productive approximation for generations, and the gap between what the system required and what people actually knew produced millions of small inaccuracies that researchers are still finding and correcting today. Every genealogist who has ever found a discrepancy between a family member's age and two different census records is looking at this gap. Not fraud, not carelessness. The residue of a world where your age was something you remembered, not something you proved. The last country in Europe to introduce compulsory civil birth registration was Greece. The year was 1856, but in rural areas, compliance was so low that the Greek government had to run special registration campaigns into the early 20th century to document people who had been born decades earlier and never recorded. In parts of rural France, as late as 1900, it was not uncommon for a person to be registered at birth by their commune, but to have no personal copy of that registration and no reliable memory of their exact birth date. The document existed somewhere in a municipal archive, but the person it described had no relationship to it. They had never seen it. They would never need it. Until suddenly, for reasons that had nothing to do with their daily life, an institution required them to produce it. That moment, when the institution first demanded the document, is the moment the modern identity was born. Not when the document was created, when it was first required. And once it was required for everything. The document multiplied. Birth certificate led to school registration, led to employment record, led to tax file, led to social security number, led to the stack of identity documents that now constitutes, for most people in the developed world, their official existence. You are not your name, or your face, or your memories, or your relationships. You are, to every institution you will ever deal with, a set of documents that begin with a piece of paper filed within days of your birth. If that paper does not exist, you do not exist. Not to the hospital, not to the bank, not to the government, not to the school. There are people alive today in countries with incomplete registration systems who cannot access healthcare, cannot vote, cannot open a bank account, cannot cross a border because no one recorded their birth. The document that feels like the most basic acknowledgement of your existence is, in fact, a relatively recent invention that billions of people still do not have. Your age is a document. It was always, before the document existed, a story, a position in a sequence of remembered events held by the community that witnessed your arrival and maintained by living memory until living memory ended. The system that replaced it is faster, more scalable, more useful for institutions managing millions of people they will never meet. It allows you to prove who you are to a stranger in seconds. It makes inheritance and pensions and passports and medical records possible. But it also created something that did not exist before. The possibility of not existing on paper. The possibility of a self that the system has not recorded, and therefore, for all institutional purposes, cannot find. Before 1880, almost no one in America had a birth certificate. They existed anyway. They were known. They had names and ages and histories held in the memory of the people around them. The system that came after required a document to replace that memory, and in the transition, something was permanently lost. Not the people, but the knowledge of them. the specific, human, relational knowledge that a community held about its members and that no archive ever thought to preserve. The brick wall in your family tree is not an accident. It is the edge of the documented world, and on the other side of that wall, your ancestors existed just as fully as you do now. They just existed in a way the system was never designed to remember.